Poland on a Plate is brought to you by Krakus. Krakus, the true imported Polish ham.
Welcome to Poland on a Plate. Today's episode is all about duck. Please join me and our special guest chef, Chef Michael Lachowicz of restaurant Michael in Winnetka, as he takes us through his trio of duck, comprised of seared foie gras, duck and foie gras strudel, and seared breast of duck with a lightly smoked duck jus. And later I will show you my recipe for ham-wrapped asparagus using Krakus reduced sodium ham with a lemon and horseradish dipping sauce.
Wirtualny portfel PNC. Dla zobaczenia pełnego obrazu swoich finansów. Dla wiedzy o tym, kiedy pieniędzy ubywa i kiedy ich przybywa. Dla powiadomień o niskim stanie konta nazywamy to Danger Days. Dla zobaczenia swoich pieniędzy w zupełnie nowym świetle odwiedź pncvirtualwallet.com i zobacz wszystko, co wirtualny portfel PNC ma do zaoferowania. PNC Bank dla osiągnięć każdego dnia.
Poland on a Plate is brought to you by Krakus. Krakus, the true imported Polish ham.
Welcome to Poland on a Plate. Today's episode is all about duck. I'm joined by a special guest chef, Chef Michael Lachowicz from restaurant Michael in Winnetka. Thank you for joining us, Chef. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Basha. Thank you for having me.
Please tell me a little bit about your restaurant before we get started.
Restaurant Michael has been in Winnetka for just under 9 years, and we are kind of the last one standing as far as classic French cuisine with a very modern touch.
I'm really excited to see what you have for us.
Great. Well, we're going to do 3 preparations actually of duck. The first preparation that we have is the stuffing for a strudel. And the strudel is comprised of a wild mushroom ragu that's finished with cream cheese and mascarpone cheese in equal parts and egg. And for the sake of time, I incorporated the egg, mascarpone cheese, and cream cheese together. We're going to combine those with the foie gras nuggets, which is a byproduct of the foie gras. We have a primary lobe and a secondary lobe on the foie gras. So when you separate this is the duck liver, the fatted duck liver. There is connective vessels here that have to come off, and some of that fat gets pulled away. And then we slice beautiful little medallions off of the primary lobe because this has the nicest surface area, and we end up with nice slices like this that we can season and sear and serve as a garnish or center of the plate item for an appetizer or a component for an entree. The smaller lobe we can get a couple of nice slices off of, and mostly what ends up happening on the smaller lobe is the connective pieces fall off, and we use those as a bit of a byproduct, but we use them to garnish the strudel so that we have a thread of flavor that runs through the entire dish. I also am going to incorporate a couple different aromatics and flavors into the strudel that will help to accent the duck. Today we're using fresh thyme. You can use rosemary, you can use sage. There's a variety of different herbs that work very well with duck. I'm also going to add some shallot and some minced garlic, and all these ingredients are going to basically come together so that they accent the duck and don't overpower the center of the plate, which is going to be the breast of duck. So if you don't mind, Basha, would you hand me the wild mushroom ragu? This is oyster and shiitake mushrooms that have been cooked with a little bit of red wine. And then we're going to add the duck confit and all of the residual fat that's left in the duck confit as well, because that's going to add to the flavor, and it's also going to give a nice supple mouthfeel. And then we need some shallots and garlic that have been minced finely, and we're going to finish up with a little bit of fresh thyme. What we're going to do here is we're going to mix this not too aggressively, but fairly aggressively, just to get everything put together so that we have a nice binding happening between the wet ingredients and the garnish ingredients, which would be the mushrooms and the duck confit. And again, like I said, the last item that we're going to add is the foie gras, so we're going to go ahead and season with a little bit of salt and white pepper. So we're using kosher salt. And kosher salt has a nice texture. It also doesn't have any iodine, so it doesn't really overwhelm the product that's being put on.
And the white pepper, that's for more aesthetics?
White pepper is nice because it's a little bit more delicate. It's not quite as assertive. It's basically peppercorns White peppercorns and black peppercorns are the same.
Yeah.
Black peppercorn has the hull intact, and the white peppercorn has the hull removed, and then it's finely ground. So it's a little bit more delicate for this style of cooking. And you just have to be very careful with the amount of seasoning that you add to the stuffing, because duck confit is cured, and it's cured with salt. So if you're not careful, you'll have a tendency to over-season, and when it's cold, it's going to taste a little less seasoned or muted compared to when it's served hot. So you have to be a little bit attention has to be paid there.
That's a really great tip. So make sure that when you're seasoning this, you almost under-season it slightly so that when it comes out and it's warm, it'll be perfect.
Exactly, because a lot of the flavors from the duck confit are going to be present much more forward when they're warm and when they're cooked with all the other ingredients. So now that we've added the salt and pepper, we're going to mix one more time. Basha, would you hand me the foie gras? This is the last item we're going to add before we finish with the truffle oil at the very end. So this is the foie gras pieces, and these are the pieces that are found in the smaller part of this liver. We slice medallions from the larger part, and we have all the byproduct coming from in between, the connective tissue and some of the pieces that fall off when we're cutting it. And we use those pieces after they've been cleaned of any kind of connective tissue or veins, and we add those in when they're chilled to the stuffing, and then that stuffing ends up taking on the flavor of the foie gras, and it also has the beautiful texture of all these different garnish ingredients that are in there, foie gras being one of them.
I like that there's no scrap pieces, like you're using everything
exactly,
in this liver.
From the nose to the tail. We use 100% of the animal, including the bones, which we roast and then we smoke and finish a duck stock to make the juice that we're going to finish at the end for a final presentation. So after you've added the foie gras, you want to fold more than mix, because you want to make sure that you can, as I said, maintain the integrity of those foie gras nuggets, because that's part of the beauty of this dish, and you'll see it when we cut into the strudel. Now the last ingredient we're going to add is a little squirt of truffle oil, because truffle and duck just works beautifully.
That's like one of my favorite things in the kitchen.
And that's the most aromatic part of this dish, as a matter of fact, and it gets a little bit more prominent as it starts to cook and it releases some of its essential oils.
Beautiful.
And truffle oil, just like extra virgin olive oil or hazelnut oil or walnut oil, is a finishing oil. You never want to saute or cook with truffle oil, but you can finish with it and it has a beautiful flavor note. So this is the stuffing. We have to let this sit for about 15, 20 minutes, even up to an hour. I hold it for a day after it's made. And what we end up with is all the ingredients kind of come together, and rather than being cream cheese with different ingredients, it becomes this, again, the word that I use is an amalgamation. It's more of a homogenized mixture.
So this turns in
That's
to
exactly
this.
right. It just darkens because of the mushrooms and the wine that's in the mushrooms and all the other ingredients that are incorporated, and we end up with a little bit darker version of that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to layer phyllo dough with some clarified butter, and clarified butter is simply butter that's brought up, just solid butter that is from your fridge that you bring to room temperature, and then you melt slowly and you allow the milk solids to separate from the oil, and the oil is exactly what we're going to have here that we're going to spread over the phyllo dough. It's going to hold as glue in the beginning, and in the end what it's going to do is it's going to allow it to baste and roast itself in the oven. So we're going to use a piece of parchment paper, and we're going to use that to roll. So we're going to start with, and when you're taking this apart, if you don't mind, Basha, helping me out with this.
Yeah.
When you're taking this apart, just be careful that you're as gentle as possible, and just hand them over to me and I'll lay them down and we'll butter them and layer.
Okay.
Phyllo dough is a little tricky to work with because it is very delicate and it is paper thin. The only layer that matters is the first one that you lay down, because that's going to be the show side. So just gently brush a little bit of butter.
And if you get a couple tears along the way, you have
Doesn't
so many
matter.
layers, it'll hold
They're
it
going to
together.
repair themselves in the oven. Nobody's going to know where those tears are except for you and I, and we're not going to tell anybody.
It's our little secret.
That's correct.
It's almost hard to tell if I have just one or two sometimes.
And
It
if
is
you
so
do have
thin.
two, you'll be able to tell once you lay it down, because the layer that's connected to the butter on the bottom is going to stick, and the other layer that is not connected with butter is going to lift right off.
Oh, that's great. So you have a little trick to tell if you're doing
It's
it
a
right.
fail-safe, yeah. 'Cause I'll tell you right now, a lot of things get away from me.
All right.
All right, this is number 3.
And this is something that you can find in the grocery store,
In the freezer
frozen.
section, absolutely.
You just let it thaw out.
Absolutely. Another nice way to work with this clarified butter is if you have it warm
That
enough.
might be two.
No, that's just one. You're okay. This is number 4. If you have it warm enough, you can put it into a little spray bottle, like a misting bottle, and you could spray instead of trying to use
That's
the brush.
fun.
The only problem is you have to keep it warm, otherwise it gets solid and then it doesn't spray anymore. So if you're doing a lot of it, that's a good way to go. If not, this works just beautifully.
I lost count.
This is the last one. And
Cover this guy
this is the most important layer of butter, because as I said, this is going to act as glue for the next part of this procedure. Now we're going to take that mixture that we had chilling.
And this was the same thing that we just made before. We let it kind of combine, all the flavors meld together.
Now we're just going to form that into a little bit of a log that is going to span across the width of the pastry.
And this is the
we've
hands
layered.
portion of the preparation.
That's absolutely correct. And if you don't get your hands in it, it's probably not going to taste as good.
This is where you add the extra love to the dish.
That's
right
exactly
here.
right.
And you're putting it on closer, it looks like, to one end.
It's closer to you. You want to pull it closer to you because what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to fold it over itself. And now you can use the paper to pull the pastry over the top of the stuffing. And then you want to tuck the pastry underneath the stuffing, and you're going to roll. And as you can see, what's here is the clarified butter that's going to allow the pastry to stick all the way across the expanse of the roll.
We're going to need more.
And then we're going to finish this with clarified butter. And as you can see here, the seam is up, and that's where we're going to add the butter. And this is going to glue everything together because once the clarified butter becomes chilled, we're going to put this in the fridge for about 15-20 minutes. And once the clarified butter chills, it becomes solid. And that holds everything together.
So then it's not going anywhere. You don't have to worry about it.
Right. Yeah, you really don't have to babysit this once you get going. And once it's in the fridge, it's solid as a rock.
I like that you do need to have it chill, so you can almost do this ahead of time and
You
then
could do
pop
this the
it in
day
the
before,
oven
sure.
right before you're ready for dinner.
And the flavors actually come together much nicer overnight. So really, to do this the day before is a nice convenience because it's already done before your guests arrive, and you don't have to worry about, if you make a mistake, you can always catch up and do it again. So now what we're going to do is we're going to draw that paper tight, and we're just going to roll it. And each quarter roll, you just want to smooth it out so that all the filling goes to the sides and to the ends, and it's evenly distributed. At this point, you're going to throw it in the fridge on a baking sheet or a cookie sheet, and you're going to let it sit in the fridge and let it set for about 15-20 minutes. It'll facilitate easier slicing. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and slice it now. We have a cookie sheet that's been lined with parchment paper, and we can get about 8 portions from one log if we're going to use it as a garnish, which is exactly what we're going to do here for a final presentation. Or if you want to use it as an appetizer, you can cut them a little bit larger and serve 6 people.
This is going to be a very rich dish too.
It
so
is
as an
extraordinarily
appetizer,
rich. Yeah, you want to drink a little bit of red wine with this because that crackling you hear, that's your arteries. So we're going to put this cut side down, and don't worry if the paper starts to roll off because that doesn't really matter. It's protecting the pastry, and that's really its only function at this point because once we've rolled it, it's already done its job. Now we're going to pop this in the oven at about 375 degrees for 8 to 10 minutes, depending on your oven and if it's convection or conventional. If there's a fan, it'll cook a little bit less time in the oven. If there is no fan, it'll take a little bit more time. So we pop this in the oven.
check on it.
Exactly. You want to keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
But generally, it's between 8 and 10 minutes.
Okay.
And we're going to pop that in the middle of the oven and set our timer. In the meantime, while that's in the oven, we are going to sear a couple of medallions of foie gras that are going to sit on top of the strudel after it comes out of the oven before it's presented with the duck breast that we're going to serve as the main course. So
we're bringing a lot of these same flavors through the dish. We have components of the foie gras and the duck kind of interspersed in all the different layers.
And so now we have a common thread that runs through the entire dish. It's duck 3 ways, which is perfect. So what we've done is we've gone to medium-high heat. I use a Teflon or non-stick pan here just because we need to be able to get a lot of these sauteed at one time in the restaurant. But at home, you really don't need to use a Teflon pan. And it'll work beautifully in a pan or skillet that's been seasoned, like an iron skillet. It works great because you have a great dispersion of heat, and it transfers heat very nicely. So the heavier the bottom of the pan, the more even the cooking is going to be for the foie gras. So these are the medallions of foie gras that we cut from the primary lobe of the liver, and we chill them so that they're solid. And because it's about 85% fat, they get solid pretty fast, and they get really solid, and they don't really soften. So what you're going to want to do is warm them slightly just in the palm of your hand so that they become tacky, and that the seasoning that you're using, same seasoning as we use in the stuffing, the salt and white pepper, kosher salt and ground white pepper, adheres. So even when you turn it over, it's not falling all over the place. And you can actually over season at this point because what we're going to end up doing is losing a lot of fat purge in the pan just due to the nature of the fat versus protein content in the liver. And you'll still have a nicely seasoned piece of liver at the end.
All right, so under seasoning the stuffing, over seasoning.
Over seasoning the liver because the liver is going to lose a lot of the seasoning in the pan because of the amount of fat that'll run off, which is you're about to see right now.
I like your technique with the pepper.
You have to, because it's so coarse, the salt, you have to almost have it rain, And the white pepper has to snow. Because it's so fine, you'll end up with a big mouthful of white pepper, which is not really pleasant when you're enjoying such a delicate dish. So the pan you actually want to start to begin to smoke, because if it's not smoking, it's not hot enough. If your pan is not hot enough, when you're searing foie gras, it'll boil. It releases moisture into the pan and it doesn't sear. And we want to sear. So try and choose the nicer side of the two for the presentation side, and that'll be the side that goes down first. If you hear sizzles, you're on the right track. And you don't want to put them too close to each other. You want to make sure that you maintain a little bit of distance between them so that you don't have, again, steam and moisture accumulating between the pieces. And now what we're going to do is we're going to let some of that fat run away, because that's all we're going to do is flip. And as long as that fat has run away, you're not going to end up burning yourself with fat splashing up on your arm.
Ah.
At this point, we turn the heat off about 10 seconds after you flip it, and let the residual heat of the pan finish it on the other side. You want to serve this rare, because anything beyond rare and it becomes chewy or tough. You want to make sure you keep all that fat right in the forefront. And now we're going to let that sit for a minute. Now when the strudel comes out of the oven, Basha, we can actually put the foie gras medallion on top of the strudel, and the heat of the strudel will warm the foie gras perfectly, and it doesn't have to be heated again. So those are the first two components for the dish that we're going to finish up in the next segment.
Great. So we're going to wait for our strudel to finish cooking in the oven, and when we come back, we're going to finish our trio of duck with our seared duck breast.
Poland on a Plate is brought to you by Krakus. Krakus, the true imported Polish ham.
Welcome back to Poland on a Plate. I'm here with guest chef Michael, who will be showing us the final component to our trio of duck. So let's get started. What do we have?
All right, Basha, what we're going to do is we're going to finalize this little trio with the duck breast. And the breast is a very prized part of the duck, of course, because of the fact that it sits on the center of the plate, and that's what people order when they go to the restaurant. So what we do is we remove it completely from the carcass or from the bones, and we roast those bones, and then we smoke them lightly. And we use those lightly smoked, roasted bones with a duck stock and some aromatic vegetables and herbs, and we make a beautiful sauce. It's called the duck juice, or smoked duck juice, and we're going to finish that with a little bit of butter, and I'll show you that technique in a second. In the meantime, we're going to heat our pan up that we're going to sear the duck breast in, or start the duck breast in before we place it in the oven. And in that pan already is the fat that was derived from the foie gras being sauteed. So now we have that uniform flavor of foie gras washing over all three components. Not only the foie gras, but the strudel, which comprised the foie gras and duck confit, and the duck fat that we're going to use that was coming from the foie gras to sear the duck breast. So when we sear the duck breast, before we did that, we removed it, as I said, from the bones, and then we trimmed all the residual fat and skin from around the outside, and we just filleted the skin off and left the fat layer on top to protect the breast while it's roasting. When we season this, we're not going to season it until just before it goes in the pan. So while the pan is heating up, we're going to finish that sauce very quickly. We're going to place this on the heat, and we're going to bring it up to a simmer. Once it comes to a simmer, we're going to turn the heat down to a very, very low temperature, just so we can keep the heat of the sauce while we're adding the butter. This technique in French is called monter au beurre, Basha, and this is a very common technique, and it leaves a nice sheen for the sauce, so it's a beautiful plating presentation, and the flavor is smoothed out and cleaned up by the butter, and everything tastes better with butter. So what we're going to do is we're going to heat this up, and once it's come up to a simmer, as I said, we're going to turn that temperature down, and we're going to add the butter. This is unsalted butter or sweet butter, and this is done to taste. It's almost like a seasoning technique. And we're going to just stir that butter in, and the butter is cubed when it was cold, and then we let it come to room temperature so it softens, and the softened butter melts more readily in the sauce without cooling the sauce off and having to have the temperature too high in the pot.
So we don't want the sauce to be too hot. We're not cooking at this point, we're finishing.
That's correct.
Just like you would, like with a risotto, you finish it off with the butter. You're not cooking at that point. It's really just about creating that beautiful flavor and smooth texture.
That's absolutely right. And if you do heat the sauce too much, what ends up happening is you separate the butter and it melts, and you end up with a greasy sauce, and then you have to start all over again and take the butter off the top, which is just kind of a waste of time, and it never really is as good as the first time. So
just do it right the first time, and then you don't have to worry about it.
And nobody's gonna get hurt. That's the way to go. So what we do now is, before we add the final seasoning of salt and ground white pepper, we're gonna taste, because we have a little bit of seasoning already in the sauce from the roasting of the bones, which are seasoned before they go in the oven. So now that we've melted the butter, and the butter is unseasoned as well, we taste.
I think it's good. Maybe just a touch of salt.
We're gonna add just a pinch of salt, and just to round out the flavor, a little bit of white pepper. We give it one more stir.
You really do taste the smokiness that comes with it, and it has that duck flavor, but it's such a light, delicate, beautiful flavor.
Nothing's overwhelming. Everything here is complementary,
Yeah.
and everything complements each other, so there's a nice synergy on this plate. Now, the fat is warm enough, and it doesn't have to be so hot that we're sauteing, because saute in French means to jump. We're not trying to saute. We don't want a hard sizzle. That's all we really want, is to get the pan hot enough so it starts to render that fat a little bit. Before we do that, what we're gonna do, and I'm gonna ask you to help me, Basha, if you don't mind, we're gonna do a crosshatch pattern, or a slicing of the fat, so that when the fat hits the pan, it renders, and we end up with a beautiful crispy skin without all that greasiness from the fat. The fat is actually gonna be released into the pan. So we're gonna go over it in very light strokes. We don't wanna cut into the meat, we just wanna break the fat. And what I want you to do is I want you to hold the knife and not put any pressure, but just slide counter or cross my lines, which went this way.
So like almost no pressure.
Just to break the fat. Just the surface of the fat. That's perfect. We have a nice crosshatch pattern. It becomes more prominent once it's cooked, because once it gets into the heat of the pan, it starts to separate. And you can actually see where the little cuts are there. Now we're gonna season, only the meat side, because if we season the fat side, what's gonna happen is as soon as the salt touches the surface of the meat or the fat, it's gonna release moisture and it's gonna speckle. So we're gonna have an uneven coloring on the fat side if we season that side. So we're only gonna season the meat side, and then we lay it right in the center of the pan. And again, there's very little sizzling. Once it starts to seize, or it starts to come together in the center, it almost looks like it's starting to mound up a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's starting to contract. That's just the muscle contracting from the heat of the pan. Once it starts to contract, you shut the heat off, and the entire pan is oven proof, so the entire pan goes in the oven at 375 degrees, and it'll stay there for between 6 and 8 minutes, depending on how the intensity of your oven and whether you have a fan or not.
All right, and that was the last component of our dish. When we come back, we'll put everything together.
Poland on a Plate is brought to you by Krakus. Krakus, the true imported Polish ham.
Welcome back to Poland on a Plate. During this segment, I will feature a delicious recipe using Krakus, the true imported Polish ham. Now I'm going to show you how to make some tasty ham and asparagus bites using Krakus reduced sodium ham. These make for a great party starter or an elegant afternoon snack. I'm going to start with our asparagus. I've already washed it and trimmed the edges. I'm just going to add it to a pot of boiling water, a little bit of salt, and these are going to boil for about 5, maybe 7 minutes, depending on how thick the stalks of asparagus are. Now let's turn our attention to our Krakus ham. I'm using the reduced sodium variety. You could alternately use their original Polish ham or honey ham varieties, both of which would make excellent substitutions. We have goat cheese going on top of the ham. I'm going to use a knife to spread it. And I'm just going to be putting it on about 2/3 of the slice. This way, when you're rolling it, you don't get that extra cheese that kind of comes out towards the end of it. You're going to want to make sure when you're at the deli that you don't get the ham sliced too thin, so that it stands up and it's a little bit more durable when you're spreading the cheese on top. All right, and now for our asparagus. Let's grab some from the water. And the great part about boiling the asparagus is you really lock in that beautiful bright green color. And now comes the fun part. And if you have some younger budding chefs in your household, you can recruit their help for this part. Just gonna tuck it around and roll it, using the cheese to seal the ham together, just like that. All right, these are perfect. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut them into bite-sized pieces. It's especially great for your family. Kids love the fact that this recipe is their size. So I have some that are already made back here. I'll go ahead and add these to the platter, and you'll see that we have a dish in the middle. That's going to be for our dipping sauce, which is very quick and simple to prepare. It's just got a couple ingredients. We have sour cream, which we'll add in, about 1/2 cup. Perfect. A little bit of lemon juice, about 2 tablespoons. Just make sure to catch the seeds. And final ingredient is going to be some prepared horseradish, about 2 teaspoons. Horseradish is a very common flavor element in Polish cooking, but we're not using very much of it, so don't worry about it having too strong of a flavor in the finished product. A quick whisk to combine everything. Season it with a good amount of pepper and just a dash of salt. That looks perfect. And now I'll go ahead and add it to our waiting serving dish. And there you have it. This is my Krakus ham and asparagus bites. You can find this and other great Krakus recipes on our website at polandonaplate.com and find Krakus ham at fine delis near you. Bon appetit, or as we say in Polish, smacznego.
Poland on a Plate is brought to you by Krakus. Krakus, the true imported Polish ham.
I'm here with Chef Michael, who will be taking us through the final plating.
So now that the duck is rested, we're going to be able to slice this without having it bleed too many of the juices out. And we're going for a nice medium here, not overcooked. Juices are still really nicely contained. And now we're going to put our strudel on the plate, and we're going to top that with a nice piece of seared foie gras. Then we have some cabbage. It's confit cabbage that's been cooked in duck juices or duck fat, and a little vegetable garnish. And then we're going to fan our duck right over the top.
Beautiful.
Of the cabbage. And we press a little bit so everything stays in place. And then in the sauce, the traditional garnish or accompaniment for duck is some dried fruit. In this case, we're using dried mission figs that have been pickled. Always an odd number. 3 or 5 looks better than 2 or 4. And we're going to put a little juice right over the top. And then a little bit on top of our foie gras and strudel. And then we're going to top that off with fried lotus root chip and some fresh thyme. And that's the dish.
That looks incredible.
Thank you.
What a beautiful way to present duck.
It was a pleasure to be here. I hope everybody enjoyed. Bon appetit.
Or as we say in Polish, smacznego. You can find recipes from today's program on our website at polandonaplate.com.
Poland on a Plate is brought to you by Krakus. Krakus, the true imported Polish ham.
Wirtualny portfel PNC dla zupełnie nowego sposobu widzenia swoich finansów, dla organizowania zakupów z karty debetowej i kredytowej, a nawet rachunków, dla widzenia wydatków w danej kategorii lub w danym miesiącu, co pozwala ustalić budżet i otrzymywać powiadomienia, kiedy zbliżasz się do limitu. Dla zobaczenia, jak wirtualny portfel PNC może pomóc zarządzać pieniędzmi w jednym, łatwym w użyciu miejscu, odwiedź pncvirtualwallet.com. PNC Bank dla osiągnięć każdego dnia.